A big thank you to all the Policy Perspective panelists. Hello again, everyone. This is Neha from Impact Investors Council, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the last session of the day. I thank the Policy Perspective panelists for the enlightening session and giving us a runway to deliberate on what are the factors that make emerging markets, especially India, an attractive impact destination for the rest of the world. This is the perfect start of our next roundtable. We are now all set for the last session of the day, an NP roundtable on emerging markets. We have an illustrious panel, and I'm sure we are going to benefit tremendously from the deep insights into this space. I'm going to take 2 quick minutes to introduce you to the moderator of the session, Mr. Cliff Pryor, CEO Global Steering Group, for moderating this session. As we all know, GSG was established in 2015 to continue the work of Social Impact Investing Task Force, established under the UK presidency of the G8. It currently covers 33 countries and brings together impact leaders from the worlds of finance, business, government, and philanthropy. Over to you, Cliff.
Thanks very much, Neha. That's a wonderful introduction. And just to say, the 33rd country only joined last week, so this is all very new. And just to add to your introduction, the GSG, since the COVID crisis, has been working very specifically to achieve a just and impact-led recovery out of COVID. So now we have an hour and 15 minutes. We'll have some Q&A time through the chat line. We'll have a look at the chat a little bit later in the session. And right now we've got a really fantastic roundtable here. And I'm going to start by asking each panelist to briefly share your name, your organization, where your work currently connects with emerging markets. So I'll come to the LPs first. Dimple.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Dimple Sani and I'm Indian American, so I'm very excited to participate in this conference and on this panel. I work at Anthos. It's a 100-year-old Dutch single-family office headquartered in the Netherlands. We have an office in Zug and 7 other offices all over the world. And I manage the impact fund portfolios at Anthos, most of which are emerging markets. And we just completed our first Indian investment this year with more on tap for next year. So look forward to discussing more on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Florian.
Thank you, Cliff. So my name is Florian Kohler. I work with Omidyar. We are an investment advisor based in Bern, Switzerland. We manage a handful of portfolios, but the one that we're more recognized for is managing the Swiss Development Finance Institution, CFEM. So CFEM invests only in impactful investments across the developing world, and I am responsible for their portfolio in Asia. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's go to Robert.
Great. Hi, I'm Robert Antaplin, partner at KKR. I've been at the firm for about 15 years. For those that aren't familiar with KKR, we're a global diversified asset management company. We invest in public and private markets, historically mostly focused on private equity investing. And I co-lead our impact investing strategy, which is a global fund that we launched about 3 years ago to invest in North America, Europe, and Asia, focused exclusively on middle market businesses where the product or service is contributing a global solution to a challenge linked back to the UN SDGs. We manage $1.3 billion of capital. We're invested in 3 companies in Asia, including 1 in India. And that very much, I think, comprises our connectivity to this panel. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. And we've got a couple of people here from Impact Investor Networks. So I'll go to Ben first.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm leading the Swiss Impact Investment Association. We are a platform where most of the major impact investors are there, from the ultra-high net worth till the institutional finances, and we also support in the governments on making their impact investment policies. And by this, I mean mainly the Nordic and the West European governments.
Fantastic, thank you. And then we've got some people from sort of DFI activity, and I think Gaurav has just joined us. However, we were just asking you to name, to share your name, organization, and where your work currently connects with emerging markets.
Excellent. Thank you, Cliff. Really pleased to be here. Thank you to the organizers for the invitation. So I work with the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the British government. And we have, along with ourselves, which we invest, we have a subsidiary of ours called the CDC Group, which makes investments in India. Together, we have about $2 billion invested in India, and we are one of the largest LPs or the fund manager, the fund investors in the country. We work thematically as well as in geographies, and there are certain states within India which we have prioritized in the past, the low-income states of India, and we also sort of look at India's innovations in the region. So there is a big role. India is a huge laboratory. It can play a global leadership role with innovations, and that's one of the other aspects of what we do. I look forward to the panel discussion. And talking more about what we do and what India could do in this space. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, I hope Matsukoto-san, you are able to talk to us.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I tried to open my camera, but it seems like it doesn't work. But let me continue speaking. So I'm working with the Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA. JICA is a development assistance agency of the Japanese government. And we provide like a sovereign finance, grant aid, technical cooperation, and private sector finance. And in the last fiscal year 2019, well, the sovereign finance amounted to almost 14 billion US dollars, and about 30% of that amount was for the India. So the India has been our largest development partner in the past 10 years. And we try to also increase our private finance window to provide the debt and equity to the impact enterprise in India. And in this private sector finance window, including the impact investment, we say provide almost 600 million US dollars in fiscal year 2019. And in the region-wide, Southeast Asia is kind of like a major region for this private finance, and the Latin America and South Asia, including India, are followed. And in sector-wise, that solar power, microfinance, digital access, and so on. Yeah, we are financing the various type of the project and program. And for India, in the last March and April, we just provided SME finance and also finance to the affordable housing. So as I mentioned, that we are trying to strengthen our function of the private finance to India from now. Thank you.
It's great to hear. Thank you. So some really diverse and substantial impact investing there in emerging markets. And I think impact investing, it's fair to say, has been galloping along over the last couple of years, and then came COVID. So before we get into any other discussion, I just want to ask, again, each of you briefly, how has COVID-19 affected your work, your portfolios, your investment activities, your networks? And let's start again with Dimple.
Hi, thank you so much, Cliff. Well, I have to say, we started doing impact investing in 2014, and we had the highest performance in our portfolio at the end of Q1 this year. So we were trending, really coming out of our J curve in many respects for private equity. Our NAVs were going up, and then, like many of us, the floor fell out from beneath us. So yes, we've been triaging our portfolio, which is largely private credit with a little bit of private equity. But I have to say, it's been very resilient. And I think if you believe in the thesis that impact investing is uncorrelated to the market, and if you invest in big markets like India, in essential services like healthcare, education, agriculture, these services are protected regardless of lockdowns or geopolitical regimes or volatility. So, our performance is not as high as it was in Q1, but we're holding in there. We've been working out on some workouts for the private debt part of the portfolio. We had realized exits in Q1 in private equity, and some of those valuations now are coming down. But so far, it's not as bad as we thought it was going to be. Thank you.
That's really good news. Florian, how about for you?
Yeah, it's been a little bit challenging, to be honest. We have a portfolio of a little over $1 billion, invested in probably about 100 private equity and private credit funds across developing countries. And how this has affected us is essentially, since the beginning of the crisis, we've put a pause on doing new investments in emerging markets. We invest about 70 to 80 million a year into impactful funds. So we put a pause on that, and what we've been doing is been working with our existing portfolio, trying to address kind of two main issues. So one is on the ESG side, specifically more on the social side, and the second is more on the commercial side of how is COVID impacting the portfolio. On the ESG side, we have a team of 5 people that all they do is ESG and impact, is working with our portfolio companies and helping them understand what can you do to try and preserve jobs across your portfolio companies. Because one of the challenges and the problems with what COVID has brought on board is all these lockdowns, people feel it's quite easy and a quick fix is to retrench, to let people go, to save costs. And so we, as a representative of DFI, we're working a lot with our fund managers saying, no, you don't need to do that. Try preserve jobs. There's a lot of positive benefits to doing that. And how can we help you work through your process with your portfolio companies? So we've been doing a lot of that, working with the GPs, helping them understand how to deal with their portfolio companies, providing introductions to consultants, there's guidance notes, etc. But then on the commercial side, a lot of the portfolio companies, we have this here in India because India's been hit pretty bad by COVID, are been having working capital constraints. During India obviously has the worst lockdown of any of our markets, and so a lot of the companies face working capital constraints. So we've been working with the other DFIs, the European Development Finance Community, to find a way how can we provide additional working capital or flexible financing for funds to provide to that portfolio companies to try and keep them afloat during the crisis. So those two angles have taken up a lot of our time, and in a way, how it's really affected us is essentially we're not doing any new investments, and we're just really focusing on how can we help our existing portfolio weather the crisis. And we feel that in a way that's kind of our job as a representative of the DFI community.
Interesting how many parallels there are there to Big Society Capital, which was my previous job until the end of May. Very similar support, really trying to provide sufficient liquidity that the solvency didn't hit, securing the jobs, etc. Very, very similar. Come to Robert.
It's obviously hard to escape the impacts of COVID. I guess what we would say is, in many respects, we're looking at this as an environment that I think heightens focus on a lot of the solutions that we need for the issues we've been talking about for many years. I think in many ways, our lack of preparedness for COVID, I think, highlights an issue and opportunity with respect to the myriad other issues that we're all focused on. I think, like Dimple, we had a thesis that if we set the right strategy for our impact investing effort, that we would see businesses that would be resilient through macroeconomic challenges. And I think that's been, very much our experience so far through COVID. So, we started focused on businesses that had solutions for long-term structural issues for which there was consumer, business, or government demand today. And so I think we've actually seen our portfolio be quite resilient. We're actually growing through COVID. At the portfolio-wide level, I think from a valuation perspective, our companies are doing quite well. And I think it's because we've been focused on businesses that can operate effectively digitally. So as an example, businesses serving students in the U.S. that are dealing with huge issues interacting with the virtual education system, which is not being effective today. I think that's a great example of a business that has been kind of ahead of its time and has actually really accelerated in terms of growth through this period. So I think it's been an opportunity in many ways for our portfolio. Of course, it's disruptive. There's a number of obviously health, social, wellness issues our employees are dealing with. But we're looking at it as an opportunity, I think, to do more. And so from an investment perspective, we've actually doubled the pace of deployment this year versus last. I think we're viewing COVID again as a bit of an accelerator. So we're looking at government organization, for example, the Green Deal, which was referenced earlier kind of in the pre-comments to the panel, I think is going to stimulate tremendous investments in technologies and businesses that are supporting the energy transition. I think awareness for the importance of the solutions our businesses provide is only higher today. So I think this is a call to action for us. But I think with funds that can take a longer term point of view, that are invested behind structural solutions, I think we can continue to create value and ultimately serve our mission. And so that's kind of how we've been viewing this environment and some of the, I think, observations we've seen in terms of our portfolio.
Again, very, very positive news. I'm going to come to Gaurav.
So I look after a $400 million portfolio in India. It is a diverse portfolio across stages of companies, size, sectors, and states within India, for example. And we've been privileged because we work with incubators, angels, early stage MSMEs, and the impact of COVID has been quite different on depending on who you are, which stage you are, and in which geography you are in that sense. So I think that's really important to know. I agree with some of the other panelists that from a commercial perspective, I think many of our portfolio entities and funds are looking at some liquidity support. There are some sectors which have been impacted more financially. We had some sort of investments, for example, in skills education and others which needed people to physically travel, for which the lockdown has sort of prevented that, and there has been revenue loss. But also, I think COVID has also sort of told us, and for the impact sort of space that we work in, there are quite a few shining examples because many of our companies, portfolio companies, were classified as essential service by the government under the government regulations, and some of them were part of the frontline services. For example, in dialysis care, or whether it was clean energy companies, cold chain logistics, or fintech companies which were helping the digital world and promoters apply and get loans. There was also a lot of innovation in our portfolio, and people and entrepreneurs in India just sort of reacting so positively to the challenge. And it's a huge challenge. So, for example, some people were creating ventilators, and we were supportive of all of that. In many ways, we've taken the opportunity with our portfolio, now that we are a few months out and hopefully the worst is behind us, to be able to build back better, have things and attributes that we value more show in the portfolio, for example, climate. And then, of course, at the end of this COVID, there are just so many personal stories that come to mind. And there are some which are sad, but there are several which are really good. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the personal side of this. I think we all see and hear the people who are charging away, finding new energy, new opportunities, and those whose jobs have fallen away around them, and of course also the health side. Matsumoto, how are you seeing COVID-19 impacting your portfolio?
Yeah, thank you. Well, there are some impact on the operation. Well, one of the program under the JICA is dispatch the young volunteers in European countries, and every year we are now sending almost a few thousand young Japanese volunteers to any type of the countries, including South Asia. But because of the pandemic, they need to return to Japan. So that we should coordinate many things about set up the new environment in Japan. And also the coordination with the counterpart agency in every recipient countries. And they are just waiting for just return of such kind of Japanese volunteers, and also some experts working for some development issues. And in India, for example, we are financing also some a public project, like a transportation, power, irrigation, and so on. And because of the lockdown, that many workers return to their hometown, and it takes a lot of time to recover the full capacity of the construction of the site. So it means that our disbursement speed is very, very slow. Yeah, and we need to also execute our budget in this fiscal year. And so we are waiting and carefully watch the situation of this construction site. And of course, they need to take care of some like safeguard measures to prevent the infection for the workers. And we have been working with the every executive agencies, more than like 50 executive agencies of this matter. Yeah, so we need to do many things to combat with the corona. On the other hand, we have working with the Indian government to provide a new loan to combat with the corona epidemic. For example, in the last August, we signed one loan agreement to provide one emergent loan of the $500 million to support the strengthening the public health service in India. And this loan is a kind of like a policy-based lending, which support the government policy implementation. And actually, our fund will be utilized to build the clinics and also creating the systems for the tele-diagnosis and tele-consultation. We are working with the World Bank and ADB for this sector. And in this loan, we really expect the social enterprise will participate in this program, especially in the field of the teleconsultation. And we also working with the Ministry of Finance for another loan, which focus on the social security issues. So we maybe try to support the government effort to alleviate the negative impact of the corona on this field. And under the current situation, we also try to support the NGOs and the social enterprise in the area of child labor prevention and disaster preparedness to deal with the negative impact of corona. We provide a grant fund to such kind of NGOs to continue their activities to support such kind of vulnerable people. We also plan to collaborate with the Japanese universities and the other institution on the epidemiology and the infectious disease prevention. And they will work with a hospital or the medical institution in India to prevent and to maybe combat with the corona. Yeah, that's maybe almost the general the feature of our operation under the current situation.
Yeah, it's getting a very varied picture. Let's come quickly, first of all, to Kamal and then to Ben.
Hi there, I'm Kamal Sahu and I'm at AVPN, Asian Venture Philanthropy Network. We have 600 members across 32 markets, 70 of which are impact funds, incubators and accelerators that are deploying about $18 billion in impact investment opportunities in emerging markets. So clearly COVID has impacted our fund managers and their portfolios substantially. They've clearly seen a downturn. And they reached out to their LPs for greater support, patient capital, and some of them even have managed to tap on emergency funding given the pandemic. Obviously, what we'd like to see is continued support from governments where these stimulus packages can definitely be tapped on for impact investment, DFIs to step in and take concessional return, have concessional return expectations, at least for this period. And this is at a strategic level, but even on a practical level, given 7 months of lockdown, the inability to meet in person, visit your portfolio companies, that's clearly not helped our funds as well. But I saw an article yesterday from Impact Alpha talking about the fact that there's been 1.8 billion deployed in the last month towards venture capital and among social entrepreneurs in India, and that's in last month alone, which means that the investment activity hasn't been hampered at all, which is again good news, and we clearly wish for this to continue.
Thank you. Then to Ben.
Yeah, I'll just add on to what everybody else said. So for us, it has been quite very positive in a couple of aspects. Number one, we are personally very much strong with the climate-related issues. So there, the awareness and the investment flow has increased heavily. And secondly is the agriculture and food. And we recently again invested quite a big, I think around 120 million in India on one of the agriculture companies. So for us, it has been, it has been quite positive, especially because the government's laws are changing here. And a lot of help is coming from the United Kingdom, Hong Kong, Finland, these governments are forcing or enforcing their financial institutions to kind of divert funds into impact investments. So I'm in that way, I'm a bit more optimist, especially only, in the sectors where we are involved with. That's mainly the climate change and the food and agri.
Thank you. So that's a picture of which is resilient. It's a resilient sector. It's an uncorrelated sector, but huge diversity within different sectors. Essential services doing well, energy transition doing well, and a number of fields where it's regarded as essential. It's prioritized. Those are leaping away. Some others losing. Different approaches for the investors, some focusing only on their existing portfolio, some looking at new opportunities, really diverse. We're going to get into some more specific questions for each of our panelists, and we'll start getting some debate. But can I just remind everybody who's listening to this that you can place questions, put up points using the chat line on this on here. And I've already put my my first one on, so you can put it there. So let's get more specific. So Florian, what are you doing as an LP to support your current impact investments? What actions are you taking?
So no, thank you, Cliff. We invest primarily through private equity fund structures into the emerging markets that we are. So for example, in India, we have exposure to about almost eight funds in India, and these are all structures through private equity funds. So one of the challenges with using private equity as a structure to allocate capital to impact investments that is very regimented. It's very strict in terms of what can and cannot be done by the fund manager. They do not have full discretion willy-nilly to spend the money and do whatever they want. There's clear guidelines of how they can call capital, allocate capital, and there's clear obligations on the fund manager. So one of the things that we've been doing since COVID is working with our fund manager, say, okay, this is the framework that we all agreed to several years ago when we set up this fund. What kind of flexibility do you need to weather the crisis? How can we help you either make amendments or provide some flexibility to the constraints that you're put into by the LP network that invested in the fund manager? So we've done that over the last several months. We've made probably small modifications to limited partnership agreements, providing some flexibility in terms of, just give you an example, recycling provisions, or the ability to probably provide more short-term working capital to portfolio companies when maybe some of these some of this flexibility didn't exist before. So I think that's on the one thing. And then the other aspect which we're seeing more and more of comes back to this working capital need of the portfolio companies. So we've provided short-term working capital to a few funds for their portfolio companies. Now that initial urgency has passed, right? This, when the lockdown, especially in India, took place in March, April, May, that's where you had the problems. Now, what we're seeing is that, not just in India, but in Southeast Asia and in Africa as well, is that several funds are looking at their portfolio and they say, okay, now that the lockdowns are being eased, these companies need to restart operations. They need to get back to where they were pre-COVID, and they can only do that if they have a capital injection or there's some form of flexible financing that's provided to these companies. So we, and this is not just us, this is obviously us with the other DFIs, are working with our managers to say, okay, well, how can we provide you an extra pool of capital that then can be invested into a handful of companies that you believe require this to restart in the post-COVID environment. So we're doing that. We're having these dialogues, these conversations with our fund managers to say, how can we be more flexible and really play the role of development finance? Because at the end of the day, we are impact investors. We care about commercial returns, but we very much care about the impact, and we care about job preservation. We care about the impact that we originally subscribed to. So I think this is what we're seeing from the DFI community, and we're trying to rope in the foundations and the private investors to say, hey, we are doing this, and we think this makes sense to help these portfolio companies. At the end of the day, it comes down to the actual portfolio companies and who they serve and their stakeholders. Come with us. You know, this is what you need to do. You need to provide support. Don't just stand on the sidelines and wait for markets to crash or for companies to go bankrupt and then to come into these new vulture funds or these credit restructuring funds that are being launched. No. Help your existing portfolio now before it gets bad. You can actually make a difference. So I think this is just one of the few things that we're doing. But most importantly, Cliff, I think I want to stress is that as LPs, what we've been doing and what everyone should do as an LP is over communicate with your portfolio. Have more regular calls. I mean, I am on Zoom 4 or 5 hours a day, just talking to my fund managers and to my portfolio because I'm over communicating. I want to know what are you facing? What are the challenges? How can I help? If I don't have the capacity to help myself, how can I mobilize other people to help you? And so this over communication is needed because we can't travel. I used to travel a week a month to India, to Singapore, to Vietnam, to Indonesia. I haven't traveled in 7 months now. So I don't meet my fund managers. I don't meet the portfolio companies. So I'm over communicated. So I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing.
Do you think this greater flexibility that you've negotiated and been allowed to use, and the heavier level of communication, do you think these are things that should stay long term?
Well, look, I think it's case specific, right? There's a reason why the limited partnership agreements, the legal agreements, were structured in such a manner. There was a reason why blanket flexibility was not given to fund managers originally, right? There are clear investment guidelines, and there's a reason why LPs, limited partners, want to ensure that the fund manager adheres to those guidelines. But in times of crisis, LPs have to realize that they have an obligation not to sit on their laurels and just watch the world go by. They actually need to be engaged. And so in terms of crisis, we have to be engaged. We can't be passive LPs. I mean, DFIs are not passive LPs anyways. They're always very active and very engaged. But all LPs need to be engaged and to help work through some of these challenges in the fund manager. Now, whether it be permanent, I don't think so. I think next year, when the crisis dies down, a lot of the LPs are going to look at the changes that we've made in the flexibility and say, okay, what can stay and what cannot stay? It's a bit like work from home, right? You know, people realize, well, maybe working from home it makes a bit more sense now because we have technology to help us. But in terms of investments, there are reasons why restrictions were put in the first place.
No, I do get that. Although I hear a lot that DFIs are over prescriptive, and they're over prescriptive because of where they get their money from, and it just sort of goes up this chain. So interesting piece. So I want to get into South Asia generally, India specifically, and Robert, I wonder if you could say from your experience, what would you identify as the nuances, the uniqueness, positive and negative of South Asia versus other emerging markets?
Yeah, I think nuance is probably a good term to describe investing in these areas. If you think about South Asia broadly, you have such significant differences among markets. I mean, you have, on one extreme, Singapore, which has a $65,000 per capita, GDP number. You have, markets like Vietnam that are on a very different end of the spectrum. Demographics are dramatically different. In some markets, you have young populations that are rapidly adopting technologies. In other markets, obviously, you have very different circumstances. Not to mention, I think, geopolitical challenges and the fluidity in some of these countries. So I guess I would say that the first point I would make is, investing in these markets, I think, requires a slightly different approach. It's not just about diligencing the microeconomic conditions of a company or an industry. It's about understanding a country macroeconomic, geopolitically, demographically. So I think kind of starting from the top is as important as the bottom-up analysis that I think we tend to prioritize in almost all of our investment strategies. I think the second nuance is the importance of technology and understanding the risk it presents in terms of potential disruptors to businesses we evaluate in these markets, but also opportunity. I mean, I contrast that with maybe circumstances we're invested in the Western markets, where consumers are much slower to adopt new technology as it relates to how they receive services. Obviously South Asia, I think, is the hotbed for innovation and I think digital distribution of products and services in a way that I think is really interesting from an investment perspective. The third piece, and I think we've had this experience both positive and negative, is the importance of local partnerships. It's not just important that we diligence a business and understand the industry. We have to understand who we're partnered with. And in many instances, the quality of our partner, our trust and alignment with that partner is as important in dictating the outcome of investment. So I think you put all these nuances together, and it's quite a complicated investment environment, which is why, from a KKR perspective, we prioritized having local country resources in every market that we invest in, so that we're not just bringing an industry level view, but we're bringing a local market view. On the positive end, I think the opportunity for an impact investor in these markets is phenomenal. You think about some of the demographic trends, it's obviously a tailwind in terms of demand and consumption for solutions that matter. But also, if you think about the opportunity to apply proven solutions that have been commercialized or developed in other markets in situations where business practices are more primitive or a market is just slower to adopt, it's a huge opportunity. I think a great example of that in terms of an investment we made over the past 2 years that's relevant to this panel is in waste management in India, where conditions from a waste management perspective are phenomenally different as compared with a developed market where a large percentage of waste isn't even treated, processed, recycled, and contained from a landfill perspective. So taking known processes, adopting them at scale in markets like these, I think you can have huge impact. And from an investment perspective, take far less risk than you might if you're trying to commercialize or scale an entirely new technology. So I think that's very much the hallmark of our investment strategy as we look to these markets. It's understanding the nuances. I think taking solutions that we know will work, applying them in smart and creative ways, partnered with individuals that can benefit from some of our experiences, our resources as a firm, and to really unlock scale and ultimately impact in economics. And I think that's an example of how hopefully we can add kind of our own contribution to these investments. And I think a good example of how we've approached Southeast Asia.
Thank you. And I think just looking at the chat here, and I think you've answered one of the key questions of what are some of the things that Indian impact enterprises are good at, and I think you've answered quite a number there, particularly around being the hotbed of digital distribution, and bringing proven solutions to the big opportunities there. I'm going to come next to Dimple. I think Dimple, could you suggest maybe one or two factors that make India a particularly attractive market for the rest of the world?
Yeah, I have one word: scale. And I think all the demographic dividends that Robert talked about hold true. The youth, the tech enablement, but also the sheer population density. So if you want a petri dish to experiment on impact investing, India is a great one to do, because even if you have regional success, the amount of lives that you'll impact is massive. So I think that's one thing that makes it, if you want to do an India-only investment, right, a single country fund or investment, your scale will be bigger than many regional plays that you have in your portfolio. And the second factor I would say is vibrant capital markets. I mentioned that we had some realized exits in Q1 of this year, as well as Q4 of last year. 2 of those were in India. One was an IPO, and the second was a trade sale. So those are the obvious exits, but there's also secondary markets. And I think, again, because of the maturity of the capital markets, the strong financial services sector, English-speaking, English-friendly regulatory legal regimes, it's also an easier place to do business. And there's lots of opportunity and lots of competition. I also think the public-private partnership model, where you have the largest density of NGOs in the world in India, combined with, again, a strong banking sector, it means that there's a lot of ways for you to have blended finance structures where different people can play in different parts of the capital stack, which leads to much more product innovation in terms of fund structures as well. So those are the 2 or 3 factors I would say that make India particularly interesting. And that's why we invested in India this year, and we'll be looking at new investments for next year.
Thank you. That's great. I noted down 8 factors that you were giving. So that was 6 bonuses there. So come to Gaurav next on what immediate action points or learnings from other emerging markets would India potentially take on to become more attractive to investors? What can India learn?
So I think every market is unique in that sense, and we had panelists who talked about it in many ways. And within India, there are several different markets as well, which are either sectoral or in terms of line ministries. From an impact perspective, there are different sort of ways in it. So COVID-19 has given us a huge opportunity. It has been a huge challenge, but it's also given us a huge opportunity. So how do we capitalize on that opportunity, looking at the best practice around? And building on what some other panelists have said, it is about typology, taxonomy, it's about regulation as well. So the AIF, as Florian was talking about, is very progressive, and there's a lot that investors in there are doing. But there is also, I think, a need for the investment community to perhaps look for more structural flexibility in the way that we're doing these contracts. And we ourselves found that we wanted to put more money behind liquidity support for our investment and our portfolio. And we were trying to figure out how best to do that, and which sort of regulation and policy frameworks allow us to do that. So maybe one suggestion in that category is to look at the whole investment cycle about how does money come in, what kind of money does the country want, and then try and improve the entry and also exit risk return sort of profile of that money coming in a way, and just to recognize this as a very separate asset class and an industry class, because regulators tend to be very protective of mutual funds and retail investors, and rightly so. But this is about sophisticated investors who can, I think the flexibility part, as was mentioned, is quite important in that sense. The second part, of course, is to look at it in terms of, as market practitioners and fund managers, there is a symbiotic relationship that we have. And often I think I've also seen, fund managers in India being, are we really, and this is borrowing a phrase from a previous panel, are we putting profit above purpose? Are we putting purpose above profit? Or are we putting profit and purpose somewhere together? And if we are serious about profit, then how is the alignment of incentives with fund managers really, how are we walking the talk there in terms of incentives and performance on the achievement of some results and outcomes? So, how does the incentive model for the whole set work out? I think is also another important area for the fund managers in India to look at. And there are ways. I mean, we ourselves have piloted several sort of funds where, we have tried to link some of the performance objectives in terms of, commercial incentives to make it really coherent with the purpose of making investments. And that's something that has worked for us. What is probably also different for us is the fact that as a government ourselves, we also have a technical assistance pot where we work with each of our investments and sectors and with the intersection of states to be able to really make sure we're deriving that much more benefit and reforming those sectors and putting our learnings with a trusted partner, which is often government institutions in sectors like waste management, as one of the other panelists was saying, and to make sure that the government is looking at those sectors in an integrated way. And Minister Gadkari, just while inaugurating this whole Prabhav, was also talking about converting waste to wealth. So I think there's a whole way that market participants can take more ownership and have a more symbiotic relationship within the community to do well. And of course, the first one, like I said, was easing the entry and exit of capital in this very special asset class. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, that's adding quite a lot there, and I think you were touching at the end there, I think, on the systemic role of impact investment. Impact investment in individual investments, yes, but reforming entire sectors using impact investment, which I think is an important addition. Matsumoto, could I come to you on the same question? Any other learnings that you could see that India might take up?
Yes. So in my view, India is like a major battlefield of the social enterprises, mainly because of the large field on the public and the commercial sector cannot or does not touch upon. It means that there are a lot of the social issues agenda to which the social enterprise or impact enterprise need to tackle. Even under the COVID-19 pandemic, social enterprises have been quite impactful to address various issues. These enterprises have worked for say, mobile applications connecting the farmers to consumers for direct sales, and developing the biodata collection system for the corona testing at a town kiosk and so on. They are very, very quick, and they indicated very good performance. And I know one social enterprise that is securing employment of the people with disabilities by providing an environment in which they can perform their duties at the work from home. And it is a very tough task for this company, but they are achieving I should say, good employment rate of the disabled people. Yeah, and on the other hand, in India, as many reports and studies have pointed out, fundraising and maybe access to the very competent human resources continue to be the major challenges for such kind of impact enterprises. And in India, there are numerous policies and various institutions that are providing the good support to empower the entrepreneurship and maybe supporting the SMEs and provide finance to the new ventures and so on. But still, there's no legislation and the clear policies to support social enterprise in India. So in this context, due to the very important role of the impact enterprise in India, we may recommend, especially government, to create a new ecosystem, formal ecosystem to support financially, and also provide a technical assistance to such kind of social enterprise. In other emerging markets, especially in the developing countries, very, very few countries who have such kind of legislation officially support social enterprises. But in Asia, South Korea, they have very good framework of the support such kind of social enterprise. And at this moment, the number of the social enterprises and also the achievement of these companies is very, very clear. So maybe it is no doubt that India could become the really big leader in solving the development challenges at the international level if they can strengthen this supporting system by creating a new a regulation or maybe the policy. Yeah. So
that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's very helpful.
Please.
Very
Yes.
helpful. So there have been questions in the chat about how India ranks in regard to other emerging markets, overall, specific sectors, and particularly on impact. Kamal, from your perspective across AVPN, across Asia, where does India rank in this way?
I would say India is definitely further along compared to the other Asian emerging markets. We're obviously seeing promising progress in places like Indonesia, in Philippines, but markets like Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, they're definitely more frontier and nascent. Matsumoto-san said that talked about social enterprises in India. The Indian entrepreneurial ecosystem, you've got about 150 startup incubators and with 11 social ones that are specifically looking at capacity building for these social enterprises. So the ability to get that pipeline of social enterprises that are suitable for impact is much greater in India. You've got India-based impact funds as well, people like Ankur, people like curated, that represent billions of dollars of local capital as well. You also got enablers and intermediaries, people like Unitas, that are helping enterprises raise the next stage of funding. I think the recent IIC report said there's like about 10 billion that has been invested in impact in India. You've also got corporate support in India where, for example, with the new CSR legislation, you've got community projects helping social enterprises, helping social incubators and accelerators. That's how mature the social entrepreneurial ecosystem is in India. Whereas the other emerging markets are more reliant on developed economies such as Singapore to come to for raising capital. I mean, Indonesia, for example, I said was second to India, and there you have again strong international investor presence, focusing on things like environmental impact, financial services, agriculture, and you've got some angel investor networks there as well that are trying to encourage local investors to come in. Family offices are stepping in to help the entrepreneurial ecosystem take off in countries like that. But, India's obviously had that whole, 30 years of microfinance, looking at SMEs as an engine of a developing economies. They've been supporting that, and the rest of Asia definitely lags behind. But also certain things have happened in India which have sort of helped grow the fintech sector, such as introduction of Aadhaar, penetration of mobile phones, and funnily enough, even demonetization, growth of e-commerce, that's helped as well. And I think even with the pandemic, people have moved to online payments. People have moved to, there's been greater access to credit for consumers. So that's resulted in that growth of the fintech sector. And Dimple mentioned scale. I mean, you don't have any other market that has 1.3 billion people as a population. So, things like healthcare, things like education, and India being an agrarian economy, things like agriculture, that's where there's substantial growth in India, which, the rest of the markets are a bit further behind, I would say.
That's great analysis. Thank you. Ben, is there anything you would add to that, how India ranks in regard to other emerging markets?
I think one point which I would just add to what Dimple said is the space for improvement. So India has a huge opportunity and space for improvement, especially for impact investment, because we have been investing in India more than 20 years. And for example, if you look at the supply management, 40 to 50%, I don't know the exact number, percent of the food in India is wasted because it never reaches the end consumer. So we are investing heavily into logistics or into IT, which is supporting this logistics of food movement. And secondly is the alternative energy. We are supporting a lot of solar energy projects in India. And the third thing which we recently started is also the women hygiene. So I think there's a huge space for improvement in India, which the advanced countries don't have. And that's where the investment comes in and flows in.
That's really good. Thank you. We've got some further time, and I'm just going to remind everybody who's listening to this that we will take some questions through the chat. So please do put your further points. One area that I would like to come back on, it was touched on earlier, was profitability. What has happened to profitability in the crisis, but also the bigger question about profit and purpose and the balance of priorities for people. Who would like to talk first on that? I'm getting blank looks, so I'm going to just pick somebody if they're not careful.
Shall I take it?
Please do.
Because this is a conversation I have so much. I speak at the banks and please forget talking only about profitability, especially when if you look at the 5% of the GDP just got lost by one COVID. So if we keep on focusing only on profitability, it makes absolutely no sense. I think the French finance minister said it last year that in future the finance will be green or there will be no finance in it. So maybe people should start rethinking about everything in numbers and profitability and start thinking about, do we have a future at all, and what is the impact our investments are doing? Is it doing something positive or is it doing something negative? I think that is where the thing should be, that the impact of our own investments, what have we done with it and what are we going to do in the future? So just focusing on a short-term profitability is not going to get us anywhere. In fact, it has ended us up in a massive, massive disaster at this moment. I mean, COVID is a very good example. So I have had this discussion so many times that just blind focus on profitability is going to not end up anywhere good, especially even for the conservative finance institutions. Even they are now changing their rules and regulations and their scope on how to look into profitability and the total valuation in this capitalistic system. Yeah. I hope it made any sense.
Yeah, and we're now hearing from very, very senior figures, Kristalina Georgieva, just recently in our summit, saying there is no just risk and return anymore. It's risk return impact, and without the impact, you don't have the resilience and sustainability to
exactly. That's my point.
Yeah. Other views on this, on what's happened to profitability through this year, for example. Gaurav.
So, thank you. So what I wanted to say here was that, I talked about the balance between profit and purpose. In fact, I think, just to be a bit provocative, I think purpose is what has driven the profit, actually. If you look at the impact investments track record in the past and the fact that, impact funds have outperformed the wider sort of indices in many ways. So I think purpose rather than profit is the blue ocean strategy for investment. And I mean that because I think what purpose is doing is it's helping take businesses into uncrowded, uncontested new markets. And it's helping develop those markets. So, of course, it needs more capability and it's higher risk in terms of entry. But for the fund managers and investors who are willing to take that risk, it's also high reward and the profits will come. And, there is evidence to show that they have come as well in this sector. So I think it's important to perhaps be purpose first in terms of, looking at sectors, because if it's profit first, then it's also likely that several others would be doing it also. So your competitive advantage also reduces, and one would be looking at more, it's like private equity where I think drive up valuations amongst each other as investors rather than, on fundamentals. So that's the first point. I think in terms of your analysis of how will this crisis impact the portfolio? So the answer that I have is that it's still new. We're still evaluating. We're still looking at the valuations, how they come. The government has given some reform, but of course it's not gone down to every company and every portfolio. So I guess the picture there is that we are willing to take a hit, but we don't know the quantum of what that hit would be right now. Thank you.
Any further thoughts on this area, whether it's the profitability of portfolio, whether it's the purpose driving profit, which certainly we've seen in a number of countries.
I was going to add one thing to that, Cliff. Why should profit be annual? Why should it be done on a 12-month basis? Why should one not take a longer view on profitability? Why are we marking to market on investments that you should have a patient view on?
Yeah,
that's a very good point. And I'll just add to it, also look at more variables. Our profitabilities are calculated using too few variables. If you're really looking to take all the variables into consideration, for example, the subsidies of the fossil fuel and things like that, you may find out that your profitability is not really what it seems on the paper. So it's not only taking it on a long term, but also taking more variables into our calculation.
Indeed, and there's you may be aware there's a significant development towards transparent impact accountability for corporates, which is being worked on by Professor George Serafin at Harvard. Already done a major display of on climate, doing some initial work on jobs, just looking at just taking a financial view of the pluses and minuses on those social and environmental areas, and actually that being taken up by a number of corporates because it helps them in their business decisions. If you've got two automobile companies doing more or less the same stuff, and one is burning a lot more oil and gas, it's wasting money. So it's a driver for business as well as a driver for the environment in that case. Yeah. So any further points on this area?
I mean, I can go on this, but let's others speak.
Yeah, I just see a question here. Let me just have a look here. Question to Florian on sectors that will lead the next round of innovation and growth in India. So your crystal ball, please.
Well, I'm very partial to education. I believe that EdTech, I mean, there's been a lot of investment in it already this year, but I believe more investment can be put into EdTech and education delivery. And that's an area that I think I'm quite bullish on. And also I think access to financial services. We're starting to see in our portfolio and with fund managers that I speak with. I don't like to use the word fintech per se, but companies that are leveraging technology to provide financial services to people who previously were unable to attain it. I think there's still some growth opportunities there in India, and to be honest, and also into Southeast Asia as well.
Thank you. Any other of our panelists want to take on that area? What's going to be the next round of innovation and growth in India?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Florian. We're doubling down on EdTech, health tech, and FinTech. So I think, again, in the midst of lockdowns and everyone working virtually, anything tech-enabled is going to just be simply more viral and more scalable. But these sectors, again, that are built for resilience and the new future of work involves all of these things. So we're in the midst of doing a follow-on investment in a private equity EdTech fund, which is global, but has an Indian footprint. And then one of the things we're looking at for next year is actually an EdTech private debt fund, primarily focused on India and a little bit in Southeast Asia. So we're going to bring in a lot more regionally to India.
Thank you. Yeah, because of course, please, yeah.
I was going to add a related comment, and I think this is less focused on the conventional student population, but we're a big believer that a huge need and an opportunity is going to be related to reskilling of our conventional workforces as we look forward to the next 15 to 20 years. And we've spent a large percentage of the time on this panel talking about the opportunity related to tech innovation. Well, there's the other edge of the sword, which is the disruption that it's likely to cause to employment over time. And so I think a huge opportunity is taking some of the digital education tools and providing the opportunity to convey and develop skills in the workforce to enable people to be relevant as demands evolve for employment. And that's been a big area of focus for us. We've actually made 3 investments in companies that are involved in reskilling, upskilling. And it's not an issue that's just relevant to India or just relevant to the US or a European market. I think it's going to be a pervasive challenge and opportunity that we're mobilized around.
Yeah, and some really interesting models, as you did, including coming out of the US, the Korea Impact Bond, some models which perhaps could be internationalized. Kamal, I think you wanted to.
Yeah, I was going to say India definitely has a demographic dividend. It's got the average age of 29 compared to some of the other countries where the population is aging. We've had some changes in the geopolitical space as well. You're seeing investments in India And clearly there's India doesn't have a strong industrial base. It's aspiring to get to that middle income status without a strong industrial base. A lot of shift in manufacturing, electronics manufacturing is happening into India. So there's perhaps opportunities in terms of livelihoods. Again, upskilling was mentioned by Robert. There's opportunities to engage populations there as well. And of course, in order to do that, India needs to make sure that it can provide mass scale produce goods, take them to market quickly without compromising on quality. So again, those things, logistics, there's lots of opportunities in area such as that. The other thing is obviously agriculture. You've got 1.3 billion population, you need to feed them. And it's still quite an agrarian economy. So again, we find a lot of our impact funds are now, we're seeing more and more of them coming into the agricultural space as well, and looking at ancillary activities around agriculture.
Thanks, Kamal. Yes, logistics. I would just say that probably the scariest thing I've ever done in my entire life is crossing a busy road in India. That's and I've never managed to work out quite how you do it. Anybody who's got solutions, please.
But I actually have a strategy for this. You have to saddle up. You have to saddle up right next to an old Indian lady who's also about to cross the road, and you just walk right in line with her, and the traffic will slow down for her. That's the strategy.
Fantastic, thank you.
I just wanted to add what Komal said. She just took my point. Agriculture, we are investing heavily into agriculture in India because that is how are we going to feed the 1.3 billion or plus. That's one. And secondly is the alternative energy, because as Indian public gets richer and richer and people climb out of the poverty, they require more and more energy. Until now, what we have been doing is fulfilling this energy with fossil fuel based energy production. And this cannot go on. This is heading completely wrong. The only way we can break this devil's circle is to start investing more and more into alternative energy, because as Indians get richer and richer and the middle class gets more and more proficient, they need more energy, and this we can fulfill with alternative energy resources, and that also we are investing heavily into.
Thank you, and I think there's at a macro level here, this is one of India's great selling points for impact investment. I mean, you look at what are the biggest investment needs and opportunities in the next few years. It's health, it's education, it's sustainable food, it's environment, decarbonized environment. These are the things India needs and India can take up. So investors, it's a great opportunity, isn't it? Great opportunity. Now we've got what, about 8 minutes left, and just a quick final round. Let's hear your future plans, whether they're in growth or sector or geography. What do you expect to change in terms of your impact emerging market activity in the next few years? Let's start with Dimple.
Thanks, Cliff. I would say this year we did our first private debt fund in India with Northern Arc, formerly known as IFMR. Next year, I mentioned we have another fund in the pipeline focusing on EdTech, which is also private debt. And then we have passive exposure to private equity from some regional funds, most of which have a high India concentration. I think we will increasingly look at real asset plays, both renewable infrastructure as well as housing in India, mostly because it's a hedge against inflation, but again, because the social impact is also quite large. And so that's one of the things we'll explore.
Fantastic, thank you. Florian.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to say from an LP's point of view, I think what we're going to be focusing on over the next 12 to 18 months is really re-upping with our existing portfolio, because we think there's going to be a strong need there in a post-COVID environment. Annex funds, I was talking to flexible credit opportunities, debt type funds that are providing also mainly debt or mezzanine type capital is something that I think is going to be on the need in Southeast Asia. And also I think probably more niche sectors. I think generalist growth capital funds in India are going to have a hard time raising capital. Will be really those who are focused on specific sectors or specific segments of the financing curve of a company are the ones who are probably going to track or are actually going to probably more succeed in the coming 12 to 18 months. So these are areas that we're going to be looking at.
Fantastic, thank you. Robert?
Yeah, I'd say we're focused not only on doubling down on our portfolio and making sure that we perform well through this environment, but scaling our business. And I think that gets to a couple of points. Obviously, we aspire to build a much larger impact investing business, which I think is one of the contributions we can make in scaling capital behind these important industries, businesses. But also, we really want to be the tip of the spear inside our firm for highlighting opportunity thematically from a profit pool perspective, where we can scale more capital, not just within our middle market impact investing fund, but within our infrastructure pools of capital focused on energy transition, within our flagship private equity funds focused on food, ag, education, et cetera. And so I think we can be the tip of the spear, I think, in mobilizing more capital, more effort, more focus inside KKR. And then also in pioneering some of the ESG strategies we have where, we can demonstrate that it's not a zero-sum game to focus on reducing the carbon footprint of your portfolio company, but also there's real tangible economic and risk mitigating benefits associated with that. And I think that's another way in which we can help KKR accomplish more outside of just our impact investing business.
Thank you, Robert. Just a quick one. What proportion of KKR's work at the moment would have an impact label? Is it? Are we just looking at 1%? Are we looking where?
Yeah, so we've done some of the work to analyze our historical private market investments as aligned with the UN SDGs. And if you take kind of the full SDG lens associated with it, it's more than 10, almost 15% of the capital that we put to work in our private markets business over the past 10 years. That's areas like, obviously, education, ag innovation. That's areas like energy transition, obviously, infrastructure development, and a number of the different areas that we focus on from an impact perspective. So while we are, a contribution to that from the perspective of our impact investing fund, there's a lot more capital mobilized against the opportunity set. Of course, it's not all of our capital invested, and I think that's an opportunity for us to move the needle over time further. But it's not immaterial either.
That's great, thank you. Gaurav, what do you see in the next few years?
So in terms of India, I think there is optimism. There is also caution, like I said, but there is definitely optimism. We will have new funds, largely equity-based. In terms of sectors, there are certain themes which are more attractive to us: climate, environment, energy, resilience, all sort of remain very important. Not least because of UK's leadership, including COP26 as well, and our general commitment of this being important. In terms of other sort of areas, startups and tech, like other have said, is very important to us. Thematic areas about, within what I talked about, startups is also about, how do we get more women in the workforce? Looking at some infrastructure, green urbanization, as India sort of, urbanizes more as well. And how does that balance with the rural and agri sort of connect in that sense? We'd also be looking at fund managers who have a regional appetite. So I think I mentioned earlier about, innovations in India. How can those frugal innovations play greater impact in other parts of the world, where we also look at as FCD development. And I think all of those become quite attractive to us in the next year or two. And we will, of course, try and work together with the global community to also strengthen some of the practices in the sector going forward.
Thank you. I'm aware that we're running out of time, so very quickly, Matsumoto.
Yes, we are now scrutinizing some impact investment projects in the field of the clean energy, SME finance, agribusiness, and so on. I believe that the demand is very huge, and direct also the support creating the ecosystem for the social enterprises. And in this context, let me inform you that we recently launched a new platform to promote cooperation between the Japanese companies and the Indian social enterprises. And for the Japanese investor, India is still a very new country, and we'd like to have opportunity for the Japanese investor to know more about the real situation with the social enterprise in India. And they are still is beating around the bush, and we'd like to maybe support them to go closer and closer to the Indian market. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And one idea, one future piece for India from Ben, and then from Kamal.
Oh, I'll just start with something provocative. I'll just say that please, I have a kind of feeling that many of these people, or many of my panelists, are under the impression that once the COVID is solved, everything will be back to normal. I'm afraid I don't think so. It's not going to happen. So please keep that in mind, that things will not go back to normal as we think it is. On Indian point of view, I find it very positive because there are a lot of new laws which we are pushing through the EU Commission, especially which is enforcing the financial institutions to look into topics like reshapement of finance, transition risk, and reassessment risk, which would force many of these financial institutions to look into countries like India for investment purposes, mainly with carbon emission, climate change, and agriculture.
Very interesting. Thank you. Kamal.
Yeah, we're trying to bring more pockets of capital, diverse pockets of capital into the space. So we're reaching out to family offices across Asia, even in India, to deploy capital for impact and use responsible investing across their portfolio. And we have just launched a fellowship program for our next gen to make sure that we bring the next gen into this space. We're very excited about the opportunities for our members and the impact they will create in India.
Thank you. I'm just you may have this figure roughly to mind. How rapidly is impact investing growing in Asia overall? Are you aware of that?
So we started out 10 years ago. We had, I'd say, about 100 odd members in the first couple of years. We're now at 600 member, and we've gone from a couple of $1 billion being managed by those funds to about 18 billion today. So yeah, you can just see this trajectory of growth, and there's more there. We're just trying to slowly lever it open.
Absolutely, it's one of the things that we heard again in the GSG's summit is that impact is now in the boardroom. It's just about building the road to deliver it, and I think that's it's a major inflection point for good. We have to wrap up now. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for answering a whole variety of questions, and we've got so much material from that. Thanks to the people who are asking questions from the floor. And I now hand over to Neha.
Thank you, Cliff, and thank you for taking time out for Prabhav today. A big thanks to all the panel members. It was fantastic to hear positive thoughts from our LPs on investing in emerging markets, especially during COVID times. Purpose indeed drives profit. Thank you, panelists. With this, we come to the end of day 2 of Prabhav. We invite you all to join us tomorrow, day 3 Prabhav, for the launch of our report on debt capital and impact finance. There will be roundtables on financial inclusion and investable models and skills and livelihoods. We will also meet Wingreen Farms, White Hat Junior and Fino Payments to give us entrepreneurs' perspectives to value creations and exit in high impact sectors. Another smashing day to look forward to, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, everybody, for your participation. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.